So if we had to guess, what do we think one of Donald Trump's next outrageous moves might be? Let's talk about pardons. And specifically, let's talk about how we can challenge a corruptly delivered pardon. Because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So it's becoming more and more clear that Donald Trump knows he lost the election and he knows there's nothing he can do to overturn the will of the American voters. So what might the next Donald Trump outrage be? Let's talk about pardons, which I'm sure he will begin passing out like candy on Halloween. And I posted a video maybe a couple of weeks ago, a longer format video doing a deep dive into pardons, but I want to talk about one issue in particular today. And that is, how can we challenge a corruptly delivered pardon? But first, let's talk about how we know that he knows he lost the election. Here's some of the recent reporting. The headline from Business Insider: Trump repeatedly told an ally he knows he lost the 2020 election, but wants revenge on the Democrats for doubting he properly won in 2016. He wants revenge on the Democrats because they and, the people doubt the legitimacy of his win in 2016. I don't know why that would be. Well, maybe because he criminally paid off playmates and porn stars to bury sharply incriminating information, to hide that information from the voters. Or maybe it's because he invited Russia to enter the electoral fray and help him and hurt Hillary Clinton. But still, he's outraged that people question the validity of his win in 2016. This from MSNBC this morning. White House sources said Trump knows he lost, but he wants to make it at least as difficult for Democrats as he believes they made his transition into office. He's still angry about the Russia investigation, and he thinks it's fair game not to recognize Biden's win. And yes, we can dissemble that short passage in any number of ways, like when Donald Trump says he wants to make it as difficult for the Democrats to transition as he believes they made it for him. Well, let's see. He was declared the winner in 2016. Hillary Clinton promptly conceded. He was allowed to immediately begin the transition. The Obamas invited him into the White House to facilitate the transition, but he wants to make it as hard for them to transition as they made it for him. Or how about his claim that he's still angry about the Russia investigation? Well, after all, he brought it on himself. Hey, Russia, if you are listening, I'm inviting you in. And then he colluded with Russia, his campaign, more than 140 contacts. But, he's angry about the Russia investigation. And then perhaps my favorite, he thinks it's fair game not to recognize Biden's win. Donald Trump wouldn't know fair game if it bit him on the butt. But let's just move past all of that ridiculousness and just hold on to the piece where Donald Trump admits that he knows he lost the election. And let's talk about the outrage to come, because the pardons will come. So let's use a simple hypothetical, right? So we have a concrete example of how we go about dealing with a corruptly delivered pardon. So we'll kind of make a game out of this. And the game involves, hypothetically, Donald Trump Jr., Don Jr., being charged with the crime of lying to Congress. So yes, it's going to be a fun game. And let's assume that Don Jr. lied to Congress about contacts with the Russians, about Russian collusion, and he lied because he was trying to protect his father. Okay? So that would constitute a crime, right? It's not really perjury to Congress. We call it false statements under 18 United States Code 1001. And let's assume that Daddy delivers a pardon to Junior to protect him against being prosecuted for lying to Congress. Let's also assume that, remember those 14 investigations referenced in the Mueller report? I think it was in Appendix D, if I remember correctly. 14 investigations that when the Mueller investigation got shut down, Bob Mueller, referred those 14 investigations out to various U.S. attorneys' offices, including the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, for further investigation and possible prosecution. Now, we don't know what happened to those 14 investigations. We don't know how many were maybe shut down by Bill Barr. We don't know how many are still active investigations. We don't know how many might be indictments under seal, waiting to be sprung after Joe Biden is sworn in. We don't know. But let's assume in our game, that one of them is for Don Jr. lying to Congress. It's conceivable. But Don Jr.'s been pardoned. So what happens? Here's what happens. We indict Don Jr. The Southern District of New York indicts Don Jr. for lying to Congress. Don Jr. has to go into court, and what does he do? He holds up his pardon. But Daddy pardoned me. I can't be prosecuted. And then what we do is we litigate whether it is lawful to corruptly pardon your son for, in part, covering up your collusion with Russia. Easy. Now, either the judge, the courts, rule for the government, the prosecution, the Department of Justice, and Donald Jr. gets prosecuted, or they rule against the prosecution, against the Department of Justice, in favor of Don Jr. and his corruptly delivered pardon, and Don Jr. goes free. But one way or another, you have litigated and settled the issue of whether a president can corruptly pardon his son. I predict that judges would rule for the prosecution, for the government, for the Department of Justice, rule against Don Jr. Because if the judiciary ruled that a president can corruptly pardon his son to cover up the president's own crimes, then that would represent the judiciary putting the executive branch beyond the reach of the courts. It would be like the judiciary neutering itself and making itself a second-class branch of government, not a co-equal branch of government. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, I believe even the Mitch McConnell not qualified judges would rule that a president cannot corruptly pardon his son. But we won't know unless we challenge the corrupt pardons to come, because they will come. We know Donald Trump. The corrupt pardons will come. And that is what makes Joe Biden's pick for Attorney General so critically important to this country and to the future vitality of our republic, because I have every faith that Joe Biden will appoint a law-enforcing Attorney General. But it's not easy to do something that's never been done before in the courts. It's not easy to do something for which there may be no legal precedent, like attacking a corruptly delivered pardon given by a president to his son. But that is a maiden legal voyage we must take, because this is a hypo today, but it will be a reality very soon. And here's what I can tell you, folks. Regardless of what the Attorney General does, either challenging corruptly delivered pardons or declining to challenge corruptly delivered pardons, people will criticize. Depending on which decision is made, one side or the other will criticize. In my 30 years as a prosecutor, every prosecutorial decision I made somebody unhappy, and I got a whole bunch of criticism. If I decided to indict an individual or a gang, well, I made a lot of people unhappy. The defendants, their loyalists, their criminal associates, their friends, their family, maybe parts of their community. If I declined to bring a charge because there wasn't sufficient evidence, I might have made the victim unhappy, the victim's friends, the victim's loyalists, the victim's family, the community. So it's liberating knowing that you're going to get criticized no matter what decision you make. It's liberating because you can make your decision based only on the facts, on the evidence, on the law, and most importantly, on what's the right thing to do. The right thing to do by the American people, because as federal prosecutors, we represent the interests of the American people. So the next Attorney General will have difficult decisions to make, and I hope he or she just has the determination and the fearlessness to make the hard decision on behalf of the American people, even if there's no precedent. Because if it is the right and fair and just thing to do, even if there's no precedent, and you do it and you lose, there's no shame in that. There is no shame in taking a maiden legal voyage and losing, as long as you're doing the right thing on behalf of the American people. And holding Donald Trump and company accountable for their crimes is the right thing to do by the American people. So hold on tight, folks, because the pardons will come. And then they will need to be challenged. As always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.